Hi, boys and girls. Now we're back to our question and answer portion of our lesson today of magnificent separations or amazing separations that God made in the world. I'm going to pick your brain a little bit and see how well you listened and how much you were able to remember. Now, my class are a smart group of kids, so I know they'll get every one of these answers. First of all, our first question is, what saved Noah? Can you remember? Water saved him. He was actually saved by the flood. The same water that destroyed the wicked saved Noah. Remember that verse in 1 Peter 3:20 and 21. Our next question. What separated the Israelites from the Egyptians or the Israelites from Pharaoh's army? Can you remember? Water separated them. The Red Sea. God did the separating when He opened up the Red Sea and let them pass through it. Let's see if you know the next one. What separates us from sin and death? Can you guess? What separates us from Satan? Water does. When we go down into the watery grave baptism. Our fourth question. Were the Egyptians on the wrong side of the water or the right side of the water when God made the separation? Well, they were on the wrong side. What law were the Israelites under before they entered the water or before they entered the Red Sea? What law were they subject to? They were subject to the Egyptian law because they were slaves in Egypt. Now, number 6. What law were the Israelites under when they came out of the water? When they passed through the Red Sea and came up out of the water, they were no longer under the Egyptian law, so what law were they under? Do you remember? The law of Moses. Number 7. What law are we under before we enter the water or before we're baptized? What law would that be? Egyptian law? We're under the law of sin and death. And you remember we talked about what the law of sin and death is. What is the law of sin and death? That's our next question. Do you remember? When you sin, you die. That is what the law of sin and death is. And every man lives under that law of sin and death. You break one of God's laws and your soul dies. Remember our memory verse from Ezekiel 18 and verse 20, the soul that sins shall die. Question number 9. Who baptized the Israelites when they crossed the Red Sea? Was it Moses? Who baptized them when they crossed the Red Sea? God baptized them. Is that not amazing? And we know that from 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, and verse 1 and 2. Question number 10. After crossing the Red Sea, God joined them all together into one what? When they came up out of the water, out of the Red Sea, God joined them all together into one body or into one nation, one body of people, one nation. Question number 11. What separates us from the law of sin and death? Every man, remember, is living under the law of sin and death that have not gone into the water. So what separates us? Water does. Baptism. It separates us from sin and Satan and the hold that he has on us. Number 12. After baptism, what law are we subject to? When we come up out of the water, when we're baptized, every believer is under the law of Christ, or it's also called the law of liberty. A lot of difference between the law of liberty and the law of sin and death. This brought death and captivity. The law of Christ liberates us from Satan and from sin. Number 13. Is your brain smoking? What does the word regeneration mean? Do you remember? Regeneration. It means to be reborn or born again. Since we die when we sin, Jesus said we must be what? Remember, when we sin, we die. Jesus said we must be born again in John 3:5. Now, I know you know this one, number 15. In Titus 3:5, it says, we are saved by the washing of what? What's that word? We are saved by the washing of, can you remember? Regeneration. Now, what does the word regeneration mean? To be born again. Number 16. When we're baptized, we are three things. Washed, we're sanctified, and we're what? Can you remember the third thing? Justified. That's what Titus 3:5 says. We are washed, we're sanctified, and we're justified. Now, number 17. The water saving Noah is a true likeness wherein what? Remember, we talked about the water saving Noah is the true likeness or a picture or an antitype of what? Baptism saving us in 1 Peter 3:21. After baptism, what law are we subject to? Remember, we were under the law of sin and death. So, after we're baptized, what law are we subject to? The law of Christ, the law of liberty. Tricked you, I asked you that one twice. Boys and girls, I hope you knew all the answers. If you didn't, go back and look at the lesson again. Amazing separations. I'm glad that you joined me, and I hope you'll join me again next week for another lesson in God's Word. Bye-bye.